Be'etzem, obviously, and probably everybody starts off like this, that Yonigul Moshiach does not need to be connected to any specific topic or time of year. And the fact that it's Sfir Sa'imer and the week after Lag Ba'omer, week and a half to Shavuos, is not inherently Nageya. And in Yonigul Mashiach, you could talk about anything in Yonigul Mashiach, and it's always Zmanagu. I'm sure that's an obvious disclaimer, and I would assume people say that when they start launching off into a random topic. So same here, same tonight. It's all going to be centered around a Sikha of Frierdiker Rebbe, which I'll introduce in a second. But Be'etzem, the Frierdiker Rebbe in this Sikha, in this lengthy Sikha, is going through the Haftarah of Achen Shel Pesach. So we're only a little bit after Achen Shel Pesach, so technically could blame it on that. But we don't need an excuse to talk about Mashiach. And the Sikha, so a little bit of history of the Sikha. The Frierdiker Rebbe came to America for the first time to visit on Yud Gimel Elul, Tafresh Pei Tes, after the visit in Eretz Yisrael. In the beginning, for the first 3 weeks or so, the Frierdiker Rebbe stayed in Borough Park by Rabbi Simpson's house, which was the shul, the Lubavitch shul in Borough Park. And on, I believe it was Daled Tishrei, a little bit after Rosh Hashanah, the Frierdiker Rebbe came to Crown Heights. The Frierdiker Rebbe actually stayed, and most of his visits, he stayed there 4.5 blocks away on Brooklyn Avenue, other side of Eastern Parkway, between Park Place and Prospect Place. The address is 184 Brooklyn, mamish around the corner from here. That's where the Frierdiker Rebbe stayed, and that's where the Frierdiker Rebbe's Tishrei was. So there's a beautiful, beautiful Sikha it was printed originally in the Likutei Diburim. Now, of course, it's in Sefer Sichas as well. Simchas Torah Tafresh Tzadik. It's a massive Sikha. In fact, in Likutei Diburim originally, when it was published in 3 parts, three separate Likutim. But it's completely a Hemshech, and it goes over 80 pages. And the Frierdiker Rebbe starts off a question in the beginning, and the answer is only the Frierdiker Rebbe develops it, and then the answer is really only at the end. So what we're gonna do is a little bit like this. Here's the directions. We're gonna start off with the beginning and the end, the main question and answer from the beginning and end of the Sikha, and then the bulk of the third likut, the bulk of the third part of the Sikha, is the Frierdiker Rebbe explaining Barucha, the Haftarah of Achen Shel Pesach, discussing the qualities of Mashiach, as we all know, the famous Haftarah. So we'll put that on pause. Let's talk first about the other thing, about the beginning and end of the Sikha. Now, my apologies to Shur Aleph, who Farbrang for a few weeks ago, and I said this Farbrang a little bit about this Lakuda. So it's going to be a little bit of a repetition, but with a little bit more Haisafa, and then we'll get to the other part. That's why I asked you if Shur Aleph is coming. Okay. So here goes. So the Frierdiker Rebbe starts off with, again, this is Simchas Torah. The Frierdiker Rebbe starts off with the story that we know. It's printed in many places. We have it in the office of Baal Shem Tov, that in Tov Kuv Zayin in Rosh Hashanah, the Baal Shem Tov had Aliyas Neshama, and he asked Mashiach Imosai Ka'asi Mar, and Mashiach answered him with Shifutzu Meisecha Chutza, which actually, by the way, happens to be a pasuk in Mishlei. That's it. That was the whole dialogue between Baal Shem Tov and Mashiach. Now there's actually more. Baal Shem Tov, the Mashiach answer about being Miyachid Yechudim. That part not so famous. We won't talk about that now. But the part that everyone knows at least, so the Frierdiker Rebbe asks. The Frierdiker Rebbe starts off a long arucha about the Chiddush of Chassidus. And Yefutz Manisach Chutza, there's a Yisodistic Abir of the Frierdiker Rebbe and that Sikha, which the Rebbe quotes in Likutei Sichas. But then, in the middle of the second Likut, the middle of the second part of the Sikha, in Sif Lamed already, the Frierdiker Rebbe asks a Klotz Kasha. Klotz Kasha Shebe Klotz Kashas. This Lashon is obviously based on the story in Gemara in Sanhedrin that Reb Yehoshua ben Levi met Eliyahu Navi actually in Reb Shimon bar Yochai's cave. So that's a little bit of a cash over there, talk about Imer. And he asked, and Reb Yehoshua ben Levi asked Eliyahu Navi, we all know the story, when's Mashiach coming? So Eliyahu Navi said, ask him yourself, okay, where can I find him? How can I find him? So Eliyahu Navi gave Reb Yehoshua ben Levi the exact place and the exact description of how he's going to be able to find Mashiach. Reb Yehoshua ben Levi goes, he figures it out, he meets him. The Frierdiker Rebbe has an interesting lashon that clearly this was a path that Reb Yehoshua ben Levi was familiar with. Interesting tier. And Reb Yehoshua ben Levi meets, he figures out who Mashiach is, and he asks him, Leimas Osimar, when are you coming? The same question. And he says, Mashiach answers, Hayoim, today. So Reb Yehoshua ben Levi was mamish excited, he's thrilled, Mashiach is coming today. He goes back to the cave, he continues talking with Eliyahu Navi, and all the time he's excited. The day passes, and as they pass, the Mashiach doesn't come. So Reb Yehoshua ben Levi, the Frierdiker Rebbe's lashon is there for bittert. Reb Yehoshua ben Levi was obviously very upset, very dispirited, and he asks, and Mashiach asks him what happened, and he said, Mashiach told me Hayoim. Eliyahu Navi asked him what happened, and Reb Yehoshua ben Levi says, Mashiach told me Hayoim. So Mashiach explained to Reb Yehoshua ben Levi, Hayoim in Bikur L'Shmo, that Mashiach didn't mean flat out a blank check. Hayoim, he was referring to the Hayoim of Tilim, Hayoim because the Shmo. So as the Frierdiker Rebbe teaches us, that means very clearly that Mashiach's coming, Meir of Yemenu Amen, Frierdiker Rebbe says, is totally in Hayoim because the Shmo. Clear, Pash the Gemara. Frek the Frierdiker Rebbe, so Klotz Kasha. So what in the world is the Baal Shem Tov's question to Mashiach? A Masai Kasimar. You know the Gemara, Baal Shem Tov knows the Gemara, a Masai Kasimar. Is Hayoim because the Shmo. So what's the question? The Frierdiker Rebbe doesn't spell out, but obviously part of that is also, and then what was Mashiach's answer? What was Mashiach's answer? Mashiach's answer is a whole new thing, right? The Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says Hayoim because the Shmo. So that's the Frierdiker Rebbe's question. And the Frierdiker Rebbe has a whole arichos about the power of a question. And then the next sif, the Frierdiker Rebbe starts to answer. Frierdiker Rebbe says as follows: that the Baal Shem Tov knew exactly what the Gemara said, and Baal Shem Tov was asking a Mosai Kasimar. The Frierdiker Rebbe has a beautiful word that the Baal Shem Tov was referring also to the Mishnah Im Lo Yachshav a Mosai Kasimar Im Lo Yachshav a Mosai. In other words, I know what the Gemara says. I know what Eliyahu Navi answered Reb Yehoshua ben Levi thousands of years ago. Hayoim because Shmo. So the Baal Shem Tov asked Mashiach exactly that, exactly Tishmo. That's exactly what's going on. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is a beautiful expression. I'll read a few paragraphs inside. Just you can't say it in your own words. First, actually, the Frierdiker Rebbe connects it Taka to Shavuos. Says that the Baal Shem Tov was the Moshe Rabbeinu of Chassidus. So just like the Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who was Megal to us the Torah, Baal Shem Tov was Megal, which is Shavuos, obviously. So the Baal Shem Tov was the one that through him was Niskal Teres Chassidus HaKlolis. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu was tested how he treated the young sheep, the young lambs, and that's what caused him to be chosen by Hashem to be the leader. So too, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, Marino Baal Shem Tov the Shmos Eidin is Bavus mit sein Avas Yisrael. Erot gesehen in jeder Yidin Amayla und in jeder Poil Funa Yidin Heina Mitzvah oder Amida Teuva hat gesehen dem Emerson lichtigen Schein. The Baal Shem Tov was known for his tremendous Avas Yisrael. He saw in every Yid a quality, and in every act that a Yid did, Saya Mitzvah and Saya Amida Teuva, he saw the true, beautiful shine. Marino Baal Shem Tov guckt mit seiner lichtigen Augen in dem finsteren Golus. Seht, wie Yidin seine mit keinem Teure Mitzvahs mit Great Mr. Nefesh und Pein, werden gedrückt und geräudet von verschiedenen schlechten Menschen. The Baal Shem Tov is looking around and he sees with his light, with his illuminated eyes into the dark galus. He sees how Yidden are fulfilling Torah mitzvahs with tremendous Mr. Nefesh and tortured. They're being pressured and pursued from various not good people. Marino Baal Shem Tov zet wie Yidden seine mit keinem dem Bekehrung shel Kadosh Baruch Hu tishmo mit Mr. Nefesh. Werd bei ihm die Scheile, für was kommt in Mashiach Goyel Tzedek? Und will beschließen, als mit der Chevrai Kedisha, Tzedikim and Storm, Nishmas Eiden, soll bringen Mashiach in. The Frierdiker Rebbe says that's exactly what the Baal Shem Tov was asking Mashiach. I know what the Gemara says, Hayoim, and I'm telling you that Yidden are Mekayim Torah mitzvahs. To be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs in the Seres Nefesh, the because Shmo was done, like the Frierdiker Rebbe says, in Moyachshav Imosai, that's already now. So Imosai Kosimar. Beautiful, very good schmuck. So that's the Meikara Microsoft. That's the Havamid. That was the Baal Shem Tov's Havamina. Okay, so what's Mashiach's answer? What does that mean? So here the Frierdiker Rebbe just starts off one paragraph. This is in Sif Lamed Beis of the Sikha. That's what Mashiach answers. Then the Frierdiker Rebbe goes into a whole arichos, first finishing that second section of the Sikha, and then the third section of the Sikha of, again, I don't know in the original Sikha, I don't know if it was separated into sections, but in the Likutim, the way it was printed, it's a third section, and there's a whole long arichos which we'll get back to about the Haftarah of Achim Shal Pesach, and the very end of the Sikha, that was Sif Lamed Beis, Sif Nun Gimel. So the Frierdiker Rebbe goes back to answer the question, to explain what was Mashiach's answer. And here's where it gets a little bit cryptic. So this is what we have to explore. What was Mashiach's answer that Taka Hayom Mikol Shmo? The Baal Shem Tov says Hayom Mikol Shmo. So what's the answer? So the Frierdiker Rebbe starts off the last sif. Basically, before this in the Sikha, the Frierdiker Rebbe was Mayrich, based on one of the psukim in the Haftarah, which we're not going to focus on, that v'ha'emuna, the pasuk about Mashiach, v'ha'yo tzedek ezer mosna, v'ha'emuna ezer chalotzav. So Frierdiker Rebbe has a whole long arichos. What's v'ha'emuna? What's the hey idea? And basically, Bekitzer, Frierdiker Rebbe describes the emuna pshuta of Yidden in Golos, that no matter what, even if Taka, even if beside the Gashmitz, it's not easy for them, and for sure, and Minhagi Chassidim, for sure they've lost. Remember, the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking in America, in Tafresh Sadik, for context. So, and even if the Minhagi Chassidim and the Varmkeit of Chassidus is lost, and Verenoch, the Frierdiker Rebbe is Mayrich about Torah mitzvahs, basic Taras Mishpacha and Kashrus and Shabbos and Tefillin is Rachmana litzlan is not being kept. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is Mayrich whole thing about the Yitzhahara, and how the Yitzhahara tricks a person, v'chulu, but there's still v'ho'emuna. That's the punchline of that part of the Sikha. There's still v'ho'emuna. Every year, every chassid has the v'ho'emuna, has that pure emuna that remains. So at the end of the Sikha, the Frierdiker Rebbe ties it back and says, "Das the enter from Mashiach. V'shefutzu ma'asecha chutza. Ati v'ho'emuna, was die Zeides und die Tates haben gelost Yerusha zehre Kinder und einiglach. Und in dem Golus Strom zu spreit und zu seht geworden, bei Merchavi Tevo Medinas Shoines, this Veho'emuna that was spread around, L'chefutzu Chutza, that was spread around throughout the entire world over Golus. But as the Yidden were being spread around into different places, again, Frierdiker Rebbe is talking America, but with them came the Veho'emuna that the Zaydis and the Tatis gave Yerusha. And then Frierdiker Rebbe again talks about that he knows that every chassid, every child of chassidim has in it this v'ha'emuna. So 2 paragraphs later, and does zok Mashiach as in them chutzos faran meinesecha. That's the diuk. As in them chutzos faran meinesecha. L'chsheyefutzu meinesecha chutza that now all over the world there is meinesecha. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov is telling Mashiach is telling the Baal Shem Tov from the beginning, from Tov Kov Zayin, this is your mission. Your mission is that in another 200, 300 years, when the Yidden are going to be spread around the world, Sai Begashmis and also Beruchnis, it's going to be not so but there's going to be Meinesecha. In the Chutza will be Meinesecha, will be your Mayonis. Mashiach sent for his Yafutzu Meinesecha Chutza. Die Torah Shabbeinu Baal Shem Tov Shmas Eden und die Avodah Tahira bebiru v'zichach hamidus wird sich seif kol seif zerspreiten als alle Welle der Konen der MS. Und euch die afil was gefindet sich in Chutza, ist der Messias Nefesh von seinen Eltern und sie das wird sie aufwecken. Also sie sollen sich benutzen in Vergnügen von ein Hogestevis mit der Chlorine Yerusha, wo sie Zeides und Tates haben sie übergelassen. So the Kitzer, that's what the Frierdiker Rebbe is answering, that's what Mashiach is answering Baal Shem Tov, that you're saying Hayom because Shmo, you're saying that it's already happening. The Baal Shem Tov is telling Mashiach it's already happening. And basically, the Baal Shem Tov, the Mashiach is actually Baal Shem Tov. Great. When this Yisoy that you built up is going to be spread around the world, and that no matter where the Yidden go and the children of Chassidim end up, they're always going to have this Veho'emuna, that's the Yisoy of Chassidus, that's the Reinkite and the Sheinkite of Chassidus, so that's going to be the Shefutzu Manisech Chutz, and then Osimar, the Malkum Mashiach. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe ends off on paragraph, the bracha to all the people by the Farbrengen, and that's in the Sikha. So clearly it's not so spelled out. The Frierdiker Rebbe is answer, explanation of Mashiach's answer. The Frierdiker Rebbe built up Baal Shem Tov's taina, mamish gewaltige taina. Ayoyim because of Shmo, imosay kosimar. It's happening. Yidden are being mekayim Torah mitzvahs. Look around the world. What's Mashiach's answer? Yeah, when it's going to go all the way to Chutza, when it's going to be all over the world, with Tofik Tzaddik in America, Toshin Peivav all over the world, then why? Right? Why? Why is that? Why is the Baal Shem Tov's taina not good? Not good enough? Right now, Hayoyim, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Mezhebush, wherever, the Yidden are being mekayim Torah mitzvahs. Who cares? That wasn't a t'nai that Eliyahu Novi told that Mashiach told Reb Yehoshua ben Levi, that only when it goes around the whole world. So obviously there's the answer in the Sikha. Obviously the Frierdiker Rebbe is answering, but the Chayr Bashkofer Shoina, it's not so clear exactly what the answer is, how that answers the time of Mashiach. Now you could say that in Ochinami, the Frierdiker Rebbe is not going to defend why Mashiach's not here, right? Okay, fine. It's not a bad answer. That's but here's the thing. So quite a few years ago, I heard a speech from Rabbi Ephraim Mintz, and he said over this Sikha, and he explained as follows. And I always thought that was actually what the Sikha said. I never heard of the Sikha before I heard it from him. And the way he explained it, I thought that was mamish the way the Frierdiker Rebbe said it. It was mamish mind-blowing. Later I checked and I saw a Sikha and I see that's not literally the words of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So number one, I'm going to say what he said, and it's not exactly the way the Sikha, it's not exactly the words of the Frierdiker Rebbe, but clearly the words of the Frierdiker Rebbe need to be explained a little bit. So this is his explanation when he explained it, which number one, it's a very geschmack, it's a very beautiful vart. First of all, as a vart, and second of all, let's bear that in mind, because then we go back to the middle of the Sikha, we see l'chayr, this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking about. Not so clearly spelled out in the answer, in the punchline of the answer, but in the previous part of the Sikha, which we'll go back to now. So we see that this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking about. What was Rabbi Mintz's explanation? He said that the Baal Shem Tov, that Mashiach was telling Baal Shem Tov, what are you telling me? You're telling me Imosai Kosimar. Why? Because because Ayoyim because Shmo, the Yidden are doing Torah mitzvahs. Beautiful. That's the way you look at Yidden. You, the Baal Shem Tov, like the Frierdiker Rebbe said, the Baal Shem Tov looks at a Yid with Avos Yisrael, and he sees that every act of a Yid is Torah mitzvahs with Mesiras Nefesh. Zok Mashiach to the Baal Shem Tov, L'chsheyefutzu ma'nesecha chutza. When your perspective, when your cook on a Yid will be spread to the whole world, when the whole world will start saying that every Yid is a big tzaddik, then Mashiach's going to come. When the Baal Shem Tov's perspective will spread to the whole world, so then that's what we're waiting for. You got it right. That's what Mashiach was telling the Baal Shem Tov. You got it right. You understand that Hayoyim because Shmo. But unfortunately, not everybody sees it like that. When the whole world will have your mayon, your yisoid, your nekuda, so that your way of seeing reality, your way of seeing a Yid, so then Mashiach will come. That's the way Rabbi Mintz explained the Sikha, the way Rabbi Mintz said what Mashiach answered the Baal Shem Tov. And again, I thought that's what it said inside the Sikha. Later I looked in the Sikha, I see it's not mamish those Isius, definitely not in the answer in the end of the Sikha, which everyone's welcome to learn about itself. The whole Sikha, it's a beautiful Sikha. But, so now let's back up to the earlier part of the Sikha, when the Frierdiker Rebbe goes to the Haftarah of Achad Shel Pesach, and we'll see that l'chayra, this is the Nekuda, if not clearly spelled out in the answer, in the words of Shefutzu Manesecha Chutza, but it's definitely the Nekuda that the Frierdiker Rebbe, one of the Nekudas that the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about Mashiach. So let's read through some of the psukim. The psukim we all know. So it's describing Mashiach, and as we know, and the Rebbe always clarifies in the Mamorim, that the first few psukim are describing the Mahus of Mashiach himself, and then the next psukim are describing the Pu'ul of Mashiach. So pasuk Perkei Aleph Yeshaya, Perkei Aleph pasuk Beis. So it describes first Mashiach himself. V'nocha olav ruach Hashem, ruach chachma uvina, ruach eitz gvura, ruach das v'yiras Hashem. And then the next psukim are the Pu'ul of Mashiach. V'arichai b'yiras Hashem, v'loy lemare einov yishpoit, v'loy lemishna oznov yichiach. V'shofat b'tzedek dalim v'yichiach b'mishar la'an v'yaretz. That's all we need for the Sikha. So, The first pasuk describes Mashiach himself, and the first thing is V'nocha olav ruach Hashem. As Chassidus explains, as Frierdiker Rebbe says in this Sikha, and the Rebbe brings in the Mamarim, that V'nocha olav ruach Hashem means that the etzem dika description of Mashiach is that he has ruach Hashem. Avaya is hoya hoya v'yeh, means l'mal miteva. Mashiach is l'mal miteva. That's the description of Mashiach. Okay, beautiful. Ruach chochma vina, ruach etzog gvura, ruach das v'yiras Hashem. So the question on this pasuk is Mimanashach. Not Mimanashach, but it's a two-step question. Number one, why is the pasuk saying ruach over and over? Just say v'nocha olav ruach Hashem. Okay, maybe one more ruach because that was the klal and now the pratim. Fine. So v'nocha olav ruach Hashem. Ruach chochma bina etzog gvura das v'yiras Hashem. Why three times ruach? Ruach chochma bina, ruach etzog gvura, ruach das v'yiras Hashem. Frierdiker Rebbe doesn't clearly ask that question in the Sikha, but that's the second question is im kvar, that you're already splitting it up. The matching didn't do a good job. Kaviyachol. Ruach chochma bina are opposites. Ruach etzog gvura are opposites. Ruach das v'yiras Hashem and v'yiras Hashem are opposites. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is mayrich, beautiful Sikha. He explains Barucha. Chachma bina, it's easy. We all know. Chachma is nakuda, is kaicha mavrik. The word Frierdiker Rebbe's word is chachma is kurz und scharf, and it's karvelach. Right? Chachma is just a point. And bina is srachvos, is spashtos, is cham v'yovesh. And Frierdiker Rebbe is mayrich to explain. Right? So we all know chachma bina are opposites. Eitza and gvura. Zok Frierdiker Rebbe eitza, to give eitzas, sai begashmi, sai beruchnis. To give eitzas, you need to have rot. You need to have yishuv adas. You need to be calm, right? To give someone advice, you need to be very calm, very settled. You need to be able to see clearly and objectively. That's why you need to ask someone else for advice, and because right in Shpia, as Rebbe was explained, because you're caught up in the situation yourself, so you're seeing it subjectively, and the other person can see it objectively. So in order to give an aid, so you need to be objective. You need to be calm. Gvura, gvura is macht. Gvura is strength. Toikif und stolz. So that's the opposite. That sounds like midlis. That sounds like power. You wouldn't describe Eitzah as powerful. Eitzah sounds more calm and collected, and gvuras. This guy is running over everyone. Das and Yiras Hashem. Das is tife verstehen. Das is depth. And Yiras Hashem, fascinating. The Frierdiker says Yiras Hashem is tmimus and pshitos, which usually comes from the lack of which usually is not built on seichel. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is mahir and says that k'maimer ha'olam as klug is nit frum, and l'davin libenu, l'davin levavenu. The Frierdiker Rebbe says that we see that people use their wisdom to go against Yiras Shamayim, to find kulus and to go against halacha. So das and Yiras Hashem are almost like unfortunately opposites. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, what's going on? So why the pasuk davka clearing those up? Elomai, Zok the Frierdiker Rebbe, that's the whole point. That's exactly the power of Mashiach. That Ruach Hashem, that is Hoya, that the Ruach of Avaya, of Hoya of L'mal Mitava, therefore Mashiach is going to be able to be opposites. That, there's Ruach Chochma Vina. Yes, it's opposites. And by Mashiach it's one. And Ruach Eitzah Gvura. And by Mashiach it's one. Ruach Das, Yiras Hashem. And by Mashiach it's one. Okay, that's a nice word. And that's the yisoid of what the Frierdiker Rebbe is explaining here, and we'll touch back on that later. Then that's more of a skaladik of art. That the power of Mashiach is that it's nice to have him. And lahoyer, that if people are bakant in the mimer, v'nocha tavshin yadalid, the mukad beis, right? So the whole mimer is explaining this nakuda first in the skala, first in seder shtalshlos, right? L'mayla the kates l'matva the tachlis. And koyach lahoyer and koyach shaloi lahoyer, that mitzad atzmut is all one. At the end of the mimer, the Rebbe ferzais that this is the continuation of Ruach Hashem, and there's a marmokim to this Sikha and Kuti Deborah. So this taka, especially as it's built up by the Rebbe in Toshin and V'nacha, is taka the yisoid of explaining what Mashiach is, and we'll get back at the end to explain that the avoda, but. So far, that's more of a skaldic of art. It's more of Mashiach's resume. Mashiach is nice to have him. Amazing. Then comes the avodah. Then comes what Mashiach is mipoil. Next pasuk. V'aricha b'yiras Hashem. He's gonna have Yiras Hashem. V'loi l'mari enov yishpoit. V'loi l'mishma oznov yichiach. So here is a beautiful word from the Frierdiker Rebbe. It says, it doesn't say Mashiach's not going to judge. Mashiach is going to judge. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is mayrich, that judgment is not a bad thing. Even punishment is not a bad thing. Frierdiker Rebbe has explained that even though people associate punishment as a bad thing, but it's not really. It's only if it's done in a negative way. So he says, it doesn't say Moshiach is not going to judge. He's going to judge, but he's not going to judge the way people judge. People judge lemari inov and lemishma oznov. People judge what they see and what they hear, because that's all they have. A person could only see the actions that were done and the thing that the person did in the situation that he was in, and that's based on that. That's the way you judge. Even a rav, in other words, even a true judgment and a true punishment al pi Torah. That's the chiddush of Mashiach, is that it's not going to be lemari inov and lemishma oznav. What does that mean? So here's a beautiful expression of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Mashiach v'zen di gute zayt. Mashiach is going to see the entire person. He's not going to see the action of the person. He's going to see the entire person. Sorry, the paragraph before. Mashiach is going to look into the whole situation that the Yid was in the terrible life of Golos. And Mashiach is going to ask for mercy, and he's going to find a good side. As a hobbenit gewollt zindekind, they didn't want to sin. So Mashiach is going to judge, absolutely. But he's not going to judge only based on the scene. He's going to judge based on the entire person, and the entire context, and the entire life of the person. And then we could already see the full story. Then we could already give a correct judgment. So that's beautiful words, beautiful nekuda. And then the pasuk continues, "V'shafat b'tzedek dalim v'yichiach b'mishar lan v'yaretz." The Mashiach is going to judge with righteousness the poor ones, and he's going to rebuke in a straight way lan v'yaretz, to the humble people. So all the Mefarshim have a problem with the pasuk. V'yichiach b'mishar lan v'yaretz. Why is Mashiach giving toichacha, giving musar le'an ve'aretz to the anovim, which the Pashas means tzaddikim? Why did tzaddikim do wrong to get toichacha? And almost all of the Mefarshim, whatever, I'm saying in every level of the Mefarshim, but they say, yeah, in Achanami, the lamed over here doesn't mean two, means four, ba'avur. V'chiach b'mishar ba'avur an ve'aretz. Taka, Mashiach is going to rebuke the Rishayim for the tzaddikim, in other words, for harming the tzaddikim. That's the only way to explain the pasuk. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is a very dik of art. People say, no. When Mashiach comes, all the Yidden are going to line up, and the Shafat Tzedek Dalim, Taka the Dalim, the Yidden who were Zaldiok, Dal, the Maseges, the Yidden who knew the right thing, but they couldn't bring themselves to do the right thing. Taka v'Shafat Tzedek, like we said before, Sheikh is going to judge them, Tzedek. And then Mashiach is going to turn to the An Ve'aretz, to the Tzaddikim Taka. But the tzaddikim that were anovim, that were too humble for themselves, and they couldn't bring themselves to reach out to the fellow Yid and to the Dalim who weren't doing Torah mitzvahs. And Mashiach is going to say, Mashiach is going to give them teichacha. Mashiach is going to talk to them. Why didn't you reach out to the Dalim? Why didn't you help the Dalim with Torah mitzvahs? Meridik of art. So that's the Frierdiker Rebbe's commentary on the psukim, and it continues with the next pasuk v'ha'emuna, like we said before, and that basically finishes the secha. So one thing, to go back to what Rabbi Min said, one thing for sure that you see a big yesod in the secha is taka. The Frierdiker Rebbe is discussing how to look at another yid. In the part Sai comes up a little bit in the last part of Chiach B'Mishal An V'Ar. It's giving teicha to tzaddikim for not reaching out to the dalim, but especially more about Gosha in the earlier part of that there's going to be judgment, there's going to be a din v'cheshbon, but it's going to be in a whole different way. It's going to be in how to look at a yid. This is mamish what the Baal Shem, what the Frierdiker Rebbe was explaining before, the way the Baal Shem Tov looked at a yid, the way the Baal Shem Tov looked at a yid in Tofkuf Zayin, and was telling Mashiach, Hayoim because Tishmo, that's now. It's already done. Yidden are Mekayim Torah mitzvahs. That's the way Mashiach is going to look at a yid. That's the way Mashiach is going to look at a yid. And again, Rabbi Mintz's asbara that's what Mashiach was answering about Shem Tov. So now we're waiting for all Yidden to get on board. So again, even if it's not so clear in the Sikha that is the answer of Mashiach, definitely that is a big part of the Sikha, and definitely about Voida, definitely a message that we need to take out of the way to look at another Yid. But let's tie it back to the yesod of this whole beer of the Frierdiker Rebbe of opposites, of Mashiach being opposites. And there's a lot in the Rebbe's Torah about this concept of Noisei Hevchim. And Bechlal, the Rebbe, because the Rebbe is the one who introduced us to Atzmos and made Atzmos learnable and reachable and livable for every single Yid in all the Sichs and Amarim. So Atzmos, by definition, as we know, is Noisei Hevchim. So for sure, in the Rebbe's Torah, in the Rebbe's view of Torah, of mitzvahs, of the world, and for sure of Mashiach, that is what it's all about. It's about Atzmos, which is Noisei Hevchim. And then also in day-to-day Avodah, the Rebbe showed in so many sichos, in so many different contexts, about the necessity of Noisei Hevchim. Let's just bring out one example, which is also about Mashiach, the famous thing in Tashmim Ches, when the Rebbe was talking about Shas HaBinyan, and the Rebbe verbalized in a sicha, what does it mean that we're telling people to buy houses in Karnait, to build houses in Karnait, but at the same time we're saying that Hakalei B'cholim Sheyovei, Mashiach's coming, and then we're going to move to Eretz Yisrael. So why am I making plans now? What we call Golus plans. And the Rebbe said, but a Yid has the Koich of Atzmos, and Atzmos Noisei Hevchim. So therefore, a Yid at the same time could imagine that in a second we're picking up and moving to Eretz Yisrael, but at the same time, in this second, he's figuring out how to buy a house in Karnait. So that's one very clear example, one very practical example. The Rebbe, it's not a vort in limud. It was a run in Maiseh for people to live with. And the Rebbe is saying that Atzmos is a detail, Noisei Hevchim is a detail in what's necessary for a Yid to live life. And definitely in the sugi of Mashiach, Noisei Hevchim is a big aside. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying that that's pshat in the pasuk of Ruach Das Ris Hashem, Ruach Chochma Bina Eitzuk Gvura, that this is the aside of Mashiach, Noisei Hevchim. This is exactly what it is. But not to get into a whole haskaladik trip into Atzmos and Noisei Hevchim, just to finish off and to connect it back to this avodadik avart. The Noisei Hevchim of Mashiach, and the Amaisa Ikar, what we need to take out, right? The Rebbe told us a million times to live with Mashiach. And what does it mean to live with Mashiach? So here, insert any given beer. But one way to live with Mashiach is we have to live with the Chiddush of Mashiach. In other words, we have to live with what Mashiach is offering that we don't have till now in life, with Torah mitzvahs, with Yiddishkeit, with Chassidus. What does Mashiach have to offer? So in this Sicha, and the Maimer, V'nacha, etc., and the different Sichas, the Isis are that Mashiach is Chibur Hevchim. And it's time to plug in, this is obviously connected with Shavuos, and Taka in V'nacha Yudalid, in the end of the Maimer, the Rebbe says that this started by Chris Yamsuf, and then really it started by, in a kvistic way, it started by Matan Torah, Tachtoinim Yalwa, Elyonim Yerdu Tachtoinim, and that's exactly this vart of Chibur Hevchim, of, and as the Rebbe explains in all the Mamarim and all the Sichas about this Medrash, that the Chibur Hevchim comes from, that this is the Kavana Atzmis, that this is the whole vart of the Rebbe Tachtoinim, to be Megale, the Lagbaimer Mamarim, to be Merapeh, the Mechitza, Bein Elyonim Tachtoinim, right, again, not to get into the Oisis of Askola, but this we know, these are the Oisis of Shavuos. And in that Maimer, the Rebbe connects it to this Nakoda. So Mashiach, what Mashiach is giving to us, what the idea of Mashiach is giving to us, is the oasis of Chibur Hevchim, the oasis of Noisei Hevchim. So in Avodah, one takeaway in Avodah, in the context of what the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking about here, the Noisei Hevchim, the one element of it is, of course, going on Mivtzoyim, going on Shluchas, and V'shafat B'tzedek Dalin V'chiach L'an V'yaretz, not to be those that are going to, Mashiach is going to give us Teichacha, why didn't you reach out to the Dalim? So obviously there's that element of Dalim, that element of Noisei Hevchim. But obviously, K'muvim V'gam Pasha it's not limited to Mivtzoyim, it's not limited to Joe in Manhattan, and it's about reaching out to our fellow Yid. The Yid that, Joe in Manhattan, we're very good at not judging. Joe in Manhattan, we know not to judge. But we know not to, the Loy Lamari Ein of Yechiach V'Loy Lemishma Ein of Yishbay. Him we know. But the question is our friend in yeshiva. The question is our family member, v'chulu. What about them? How do we look at them? And the Noisei Hevchim element that Mashiach introduces to us is that of course we're not condoning negative actions. And like we said, Mashiach is going to be shafat. He's going to be mechiach. We're not whitewashing negative things, but the ability to separate the negative act and the negative action from the positive of the Yid, from the Tayarkite of the Yid, and to know that that's really what the Yid is, that's an avodah of Noisei Hevchim. It's absolutely an avodah of Noisei Hevchim. And even more pashat, that I don't like the guy. He's not my personality. He's not my clique. I don't want to go on shlichus with him, and I don't want to go at the camp with him. And I could do it anyway. I could get myself to do it anyway. That's a nice hefchem. There's nothing more Mashiach than that. So what did Rabbi Wagner talk about by Yonah Gil Moshiach Shiur? He said that we have to be nice to our friends. Very nice, l'chaim. Why not? L'chaim.